making by the EPA. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate has now expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce, printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute, consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-30. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order, except those printed in Part A of House Report 113-322. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in Part A of House Report 113-322. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in Part A of House Report Number 113-322, offered by Ms. Sinema of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Sinema, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
My amendment would strike language that expands eligibility for the National Priorities List in Section 204, which is overseen by the Environmental Protection Agency. My amendment also reinstates language that directs listings of the highest priority facilities for cleanup and guarantees that state-recommended sites receive priority. In 2003, an agreement was finalized to provide much-needed cleanup to the North Indian Bend wash site in my district. The site, formerly used for industrial production and manufacturing, now spans several housing developments in which thousands of Arizona families, students, and seniors reside. Since then, federal, state, and local stakeholders have worked together to put a 25-year plan in place to address soil and water contamination at this site, but those plans have not gone uninterrupted. In January of 2008, more than 3.5 million gallons of contaminated water were mistakenly delivered from this site to homes in Paradise Valley. And in July of that same year, irrigation water used from this site triggered a study at an elementary school in my district to determine if the school grounds had been contaminated. The North Indian Bend wash site is one of many sites across the country listed under the National Priorities List, which provides much-needed funding to assist states with cleanup efforts. In keeping with the mission of the National Priorities List to protect public health, my amendment protects funding for important cleanup projects like the North Indian Bend wash that are taking place in hundreds of communities across the country. The underlying bill would expand eligibility for the National Priorities List, stretching its mission beyond its current financial means without providing additional funding to accommodate this expansion. My amendment prevents this unfunded expansion. In times of financial shortfall, we should ensure that we efficiently and responsibly use taxpayer dollars to prioritize projects by need and maximize our impact on improving public health. While I agree that providing more robust state input is essential to crafting better environmental policy, H.R. 2279 would actually repeal language that requires the administration to prioritize the most urgent and impactful state projects for cleanup. I also believe that striking the highest priorities facility language, as called for in the underlying bill, may have the unintended consequence of diminishing the statutory role that states have in determining EPA's cleanup priorities. The underlying bill strikes the only clause in the current law that explicitly protects states' rights with NPL. Without this language, it's possible that the underlying bill could result in the EPA placing certain projects that states have requested at the bottom of their funding priorities while still following the law. My amendment reinstates the language directing EPA to make tough choices that necessarily respect the interests of our states. We all share the desire to work towards common sense, reasonable solutions, using tax dollars wisely, facilitating job growth, and improving public health. This amendment provides a meaningful fix to the underlying bill by preventing an unfunded expansion of the NPL and directing the administration to make tough choices that respect the rights of states. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment. And, Mr. Chair, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Arizona reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment strikes the provision that would allow states to list a site on the national priorities list once every 5 years. States have a great deal of experience and expertise in cleaning up sites contaminated by hazardous waste, and states are often in a better position to understand the realities of site cleanup in their state and to understand the local or regional issues affecting the cleanup. But there are times when it would be better addressed by the EPA under CERCLA, and there would be a significant delay in the listing process. And as a result, the bill also allows a state to designate a site that meets the criteria for listing to the national priorities list once every 5 years. CERCLA currently permits states to list a site on the national priorities list only once. States have taken to calling this their silver bullet. Using the silver bullet fast-tracks the listing of a site on the NPL and allows states to often avoid the lengthy listing process. Some states have already used their silver bullet, while others hold on to it and wait for a site that it believes would be better addressed by the EPA under CERCLA. My colleague indicated in a Dear Colleague letter she circulated earlier today that the bill could result in EPA placing silver bullet projects at the bottom of the priority list while still remaining in statutory compliance. While I appreciate my colleague's concern, this statement is both misleading and incorrect. The reality is that EPA can place a silver bullet site, or any other site for that matter, at the bottom of its priority list at any time. This bill does not change the EPA's ability to prioritize sites for cleanup. CERCLA is a very process-heavy process, and states are often reluctant to wade into the drawn-out CERCLA process. They would rather clean up the sites themselves and avoid the stigma associated with having a Superfund site in their state. However, there are times when the only way to get a site cleaned up is to get it on the Superfund list. It's not an easy conclusion for states to come to, and states are not clamoring to list on the national priorities list. So any argument that this bill would somehow result in an onslaught of new listings by the states would simply not play out. One of the arguments against allowing states to list a site on the NPL is that it will somehow change the EPA's prioritization of how to spend its cleanup dollars. Just because a site is listed on the NPL does not mean that it will automatically receive funding or somehow jump to the front of the line to receive cleanup dollars. Nothing in this bill changes the fact that the EPA sets the priority for sites to be cleaned up, and the EPA decides how to spend its cleanup dollars. Furthermore, if a site is listed and is being cleaned up using federal dollars, states are financially invested in making sure the cleanup is done right. States must contribute 10% of the overall remedial costs and all of the long-term operation and the maintenance costs. And with that, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentlelady from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 1 minute to my colleague from New York, Mr. Sean Patrick Maloney.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my colleague's amendment requiring the EPA to stay focused on the national priorities list. There are 9 Superfund sites where I'm from in the Hudson Valley of New York. Toxic sites once declared uninhabitable are now engines of economic development, and I want to credit the good folks at the EPA, including my friend Judith Enck, who leads Region 2. But one Hudson Valley community with poison in their water has waited over 10 years for a solution. EPA began cleanup at the site in Hopewell Junction in 2003 and officially added Hopewell to the Superfund National Priorities list in 2005. Hopewell Junction isn't some abandoned wasteland. It isn't an empty brownfield. It's a community full of children and families who need our help and who need our help now. Hopewell could be a neighborhood anywhere, a neighborhood where families shouldn't have to choose between clean water and their children's health, between selling their house or staying in a place where they grew up and loved but is now contaminated. My neighbors like Deborah Hall have put blood, sweat, and tears into this effort for 10 years to try to clean up Hopewell. 10 years telling anyone who would listen that Hopewell must be a priority because they can't wait. It's outrageous, and they deserve better from their government, and I support this amendment to keep our priorities straight, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Gentleman's
and I
time
yield
expired.
back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Arizona is recognized with 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I share the desire of my Republican colleagues to increase the input provided by and the role of states in listing facilities on the national priorities list. But by adding more sites to an already overwhelmed program, we may diminish the effectiveness of this important program. I'm also concerned that the underlying bill, by striking the current statutory language that directs EPA to give state-recommended sites priority, could have an unintended consequence of decreasing the role of states in this process. For these reasons, Mr. Chair, I urge my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, ironically, the EPA often pushes states to identify more sites that the EPA can put on the list, so the EPA can argue for more cleanup funding. The EPA incentivizes states to identify sites that meet the listing criteria by giving the states that identify sites more funds to do initial site assessments. So the long and short of it is that the EPA wants more sites on the NPL. And the EPA wants the states to assist with identifying NPL sites. But the EPA does not want to relinquish control over the actual selection of the appropriate sites. We're trying to help fix that. Again, I urge a no vote from my colleagues on the Sinema amendment. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time, all time having expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Arizona. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Gentlelady from Arizona.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Arizona will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report 113-322. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report Number 113-322, offered by Mr. Tonko of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment adds a savings clause to H.R. 2279 to avoid unintended consequences and detrimental impacts on current and future site cleanup efforts. We certainly know that the actual provisions of a bill trump the intended goals of the legislation. If, as the supporters of this bill claim, it will not increase litigation, it will not increase costs or delay ongoing or future site cleanups, my amendment would have no effect. However, if the administration's analysis is correct, and I believe it is, my amendment will keep current site cleanups on track and ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent efficiently, spent on cleaning up contaminated sites and not spent in courtrooms. If the committee had taken additional time to do the necessary oversight that would enable us to identify the best options for improving the Superfund program, my amendment would not be necessary. But the many problems with this bill that Democratic members of the committee have raised and that are echoed in the administration's analysis make my amendment truly necessary. As the administration's statement of policy points out, H.R. 2279 severely reduces the federal government's role in the cleanup of federal sites. The federal government's ability to set a worst-first prioritization agenda for site cleanups is eliminated. The federal government pays the vast majority of the costs for site cleanups on federal lands and sites on the national priorities list. The federal government certainly should consult with the state on sites within its borders, but especially in cases where federal land, federal tax dollars, federal employees, and federal operations are concerned, the federal government should have the last word. My amendment provides a prudent insurance policy to ensure that we do not use limited Superfund resources to litigate rather than to mitigate. My amendment ensures that we move forward. It ensures that we clean up these sites and convert them from revenue liabilities to revenue enhancements. It ensures that we reduce public health risks from contamination. With that, I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and, Mr. Chair, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from, what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure my colleague's amendment is well-intentioned, and in fact, I agree with him. I do not want to see an increase in litigation or a slowdown in the cleanup process or a decrease in funds available to clean up Superfund sites. But this amendment is not necessary because H.R. 2279 will not do any of those things. CERCLA has been implemented for over 30 years, and the EPA has developed many practices and policies during that time. Some of the policies work and are consistently implemented, but many of the policies or practices are ineffective or aren't consistently applied across the EPA regions. The EPA has done a good job of getting contaminated sites cleaned up under CERCLA, but that doesn't mean that we can't do better. States are often in a better position to understand the local or regional issues affecting the cleanup, and states are well positioned to assist the EPA with all aspects of the response action. By ensuring that the states have a meaningful role in the federal-state partnership under CERCLA and making sure that federal entities are on a level playing field with private entities engaged in CERCLA cleanups, we can do better and get more sites cleaned up faster. My colleague's amendment implies that the purpose of this bill is to thwart cleanup efforts. On the contrary, the purpose of this legislation is to make sure sites get cleaned up in a timely fashion by enhancing the existing role of the states, which are in the best position to assess the conditions at the site. The bill adjusts the top-down culture of CERCLA cleanups, but the bill does not alter EPA's lead role in implementing CERCLA. States are already involved in the CERCLA process. Ensuring that states have a meaningful and substantial role will not slow down the cleanup process. My colleague's amendment also implies that H.R. 2279 will reduce the amount of funds available for cleanup. This is simply not the case. Congress decides on the amount of money to be appropriated to the EPA or other federal agencies for cleanups, and that is not changed by this legislation. It is up to the federal agencies to prioritize how they spend the appropriated cleanup funds, and nothing in this bill changes the way money appropriated for cleanups is spent. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chair, our colleague and my friend from the state of Ohio indicates that the measure will not, this bill will not increase litigation or increase costs or delay ongoing or future site cleanups. And so then my amendment would not affect the measure before the House. So it really is a statement in support of the amendment. There's no just reason offered then to not support the amendment. And with that, again, I would encourage my colleagues to support the given amendment.
The gentleman reserve or gentleman
And with
yield?
that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized to close with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again,
remaining.
I want to say how much I respect my colleague, Mr. Tonko. We continue to work together, have worked together, and have had some successes in holding the EPA accountable to the law, and I appreciate working with him. But this amendment, although well-intentioned, is drafted in such a way that makes it impossibly vague. It is indeterminable whether a provision of the bill would increase the potential for litigation, and I continue to urge my colleagues to vote no on the Tonko amendment. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio yields back the balance of his time, all time having expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say nay. In the opinion, Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair,
The gentleman from New York.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part A of House Report 113-322, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Ms. Sinema of Arizona. Amendment number 2 by Mr. Tonko of New York. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in Part A of House Report 113-322 by the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Sinema, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in Part A of House Report Number 113-322, offered by Ms. Sinema of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Good morning. I come out here to this office where I've been many times before, and I come out here today to apologize to the people of New Jersey. I apologize to the people of Fort Lee, and I apologize to the members of the state legislature. I am embarrassed and humiliated by the conduct of some of the people on my team. There's no doubt in my mind that the conduct that they exhibited is completely unacceptable and showed a lack of respect for their appropriate role of government and for the people that we're trusted to serve. Two pieces to what I want to talk about today. The first is, I believe that all of the people who were affected by this conduct deserve this apology, and that's why I'm giving it to them. I also need to apologize to them for my failure as the governor of this state to understand the true nature of this problem sooner than I did. But I believe I have an understanding now of the true nature of the problem, and I've taken the following action as a result. This morning, I've terminated the employment of Bridget Kelly, effective immediately. I terminated her employment because she lied to me. I brought my senior staff together, I think about 4 weeks ago, tomorrow, and I put to all of them one simple challenge. If there is any information that you know about the decision to close these lanes in Fort Lee, you have 1 hour to tell either my Chief of Staff, Kevin O'Dowd, or my Chief Counsel, Charlie McKenna. I told them that in an hour I was going to go out in a press conference, and if no one gave me other information to the contrary, that I was going to say that no one on my staff was involved in this matter. Over the course of the next hour, Kevin and Charlie interviewed each member of my senior staff, came back and reported to me that they all reported that there was no information other than what we already knew that had been testified to by Senator Baroni regarding this incident. I then questioned Kevin O'Dowd and Charlie McKenna directly, since they are the only two who report directly to me, and they assured me that they had no information that would change my ability to be able to say that no one, in response to Angie's question, on my staff was involved in this matter. That was obviously a lie. And the emails that I saw for the first time yesterday morning when they were broken in, I believe, the Bergen Record story, proved that that was a lie. There's no justification for that behavior. There's no justification for ever lying to a governor or a person in authority in this government. And as a result, I've terminated Bridget's employment immediately this morning. Secondly, I have and will continue to, started yesterday, to once again now have personal one-on-one discussions myself with the remaining members of my senior staff to determine if there's any other information that I do not know and need to know in order to take appropriate action. I'm not completed with those interviews yet, but when I am, if there is additional information that needs to be disclosed, I will do so. If there's additional actions that need to be taken with my senior staff, I will do so. I will tell you, though, it's been written a lot over the last couple of days about what a tight-knit staff I have and how closely everyone works together, and that is true. And ever since the time I was U.S. Attorney, I've engendered the sense and feeling among the people closest to me that we're a family, and we work together, and we tell each other the truth, we support each other when we need to be supported, and we admonish each other when we need to be admonished. I am heartbroken that someone who I permitted to be in that circle of trust for the last 5 years betrayed my trust. I would never have come out here 4 or 5 weeks ago and made a joke about these lane closures if I had ever had an inkling that anyone on my staff would have been so stupid but to be involved and then so deceitful as to just to not disclose the information of their involvement to me when directly asked by their superior. And those questions were not asked, by the way, just once. They were asked repeatedly. So I take this action today because it's my job. I am responsible for what happened. I am sad to report to the people of New Jersey that we fell short. We fell short of the expectations that we've created over the last 4 years for the type of excellence in government that they should expect from this office. But I have repeatedly said to them that while I promised them the best governor's office I can give them, I could never promise them a perfect governor's office. And so when I find those imperfections, those mistakes, those lies, my obligation as the chief executive of this state is to act. And as to Bridget Kelly, I've acted today. Secondly, I was disturbed by the tone and behavior and attitude, callous indifference that was displayed in the emails by my former campaign manager, Bill Stepien. And reading that, it made me lose my confidence in Bill's judgment. And you cannot have someone at the top of your political operation who you do not have confidence in. As a result, I've instructed Bill Stepien to not place his name in nomination for state party chairman, and he will not be considered for state party chairman. And I've instructed him to withdraw his consultancy with the Republican Governors Association. If I cannot trust someone's judgment, I cannot ask others to do so, and I would not place him at the head of my political operation because of the lack of judgment that was shown in the emails that were revealed yesterday. That has also been communicated to Mr. Stepien last night. There's no doubt that Bill has been one of my closest advisors over the last 5 years. And so for that, too, I am sad today to have to take this action. But I also know that I have a job to do. And it's the job that I've asked the people of New Jersey to entrust me with. And I can never allow personal feelings or long-standing relationships to get in the way of doing my job the way it's appropriate to do it. But I don't want any of you to confuse what I'm saying this morning. Ultimately, I am responsible for what happens under my watch, the good and the bad. And when mistakes are made, then I have to own up to them and take the action that I believe is necessary in order to remediate them. As I mentioned to you earlier, I spent all day yesterday digging into talking to folks and getting to the bottom of things. I know there was much discussion yesterday about what was I doing. Well, let me tell you, everybody, I was blindsided yesterday morning. I was done with my workout yesterday morning and got a call from my communications director at about 8:50, 8:55, informing me of this story that had just broken on the Bergen Record website. That was the first time I knew about this. It's the first time I had seen any of the documents that were revealed yesterday. And so before I came out and spoke to all of you, I wanted to do the best I could to try to get to the bottom on some of this so that when I came out, I could answer questions as best I can and take appropriate action if action was necessary. There was no doubt from reading those emails yesterday in my mind that action was necessary. And then I wanted to make sure that I spoke to those people who advised me to make sure if there was any other information they were aware of that I had it before I acted. I'm going to continue this process. I couldn't get it all done yesterday. And as I said, if there's more information that I uncover, I'll act accordingly in terms of releasing it to the public and taking whatever action may be necessary, if any is, for any other issues. And also will react to any information that's incoming from any place else, given that there's an OIG investigation and a legislative investigation. Later today, I'm going to be going to Fort Lee. I'm asked to meet with the mayor to apologize to him personally, face-to-face, and also to apologize to the people of Fort Lee in their town. I think they need to see me do that personally, and I intend to do that later on today. People of those communities for 4 days were impacted in a completely callous and indifferent way, and I'm going to go and apologize for that. Let me conclude with this. This is not the tone that I've set over the last 4 years in this building. It's not the environment I've worked so hard to achieve. We saw just a few months ago, and I've seen over the course of the last 4 years, Republicans and Democrats working together, not without argument. Government's never without argument, but ultimately coming to resolution on so many different issues in a bipartisan way and running a campaign that was in fact a bipartisan campaign. And so I am extraordinarily disappointed by this. But this is the exception. It is not the rule of what's happened over the last 4 years in this administration. I've considered it over the last 4 years to be my job to be the governor of every New Jerseyan, Republican, Democrat, independent, or unaffiliated. And I've worked with elected officials on both sides of the aisle, ones that I agree with and ones that I disagree with. The political overtones that were exhibited in those documents released yesterday and the conduct by those people is not acceptable. But people, I think, all across this state understand that human beings are not perfect and mistakes are made. And I believe what they expect of me as the chief executive of this state is when that information comes into my possession, that I consider it and then act as swiftly as possible to remediate whatever ill occurred. That's what I've done today. Actions have consequences. And I'm living up to that right now. And I'll say one last thing. just so we're really clear. I had no knowledge or involvement in this issue, in its planning or its execution, and I am stunned by the abject stupidity that was shown here, regardless of what the facts ultimately uncover. This was handled in a callous and indifferent way, and it is not the way this administration has conducted itself over the last 4 years, and not the way it will conduct itself over the next 4. I will do everything within my power to assure the people of New Jersey that, and I thank them for their willingness to consider my apology on behalf of this government. In the end, I have 65,000 people working for me every day, and I cannot know what each one of them is doing at every minute. But that doesn't matter. I'm ultimately responsible for what they do. And that's why I took this action. David?
Governor, beyond the apology and determinations that you've announced, what other steps, concrete steps, do you plan to take to demonstrate to the people of New Jersey and the people of the country that you want to change the perception of what has happened here? And will that include working cooperatively with these investigations that are now moving forward? Because in the past you had some rather nasty words for the people who were heading them up.
Yeah, well, I apologize for that this morning, David, because I was being led to believe by folks around me that there was no basis to this. And so, you know, and let's be fair, there have been times when there have been investigations around here that have led to nothing and have had no basis. But I was wrong. And so now, having been proven wrong, of course we'll work cooperatively with the investigations. You know, I'm going through an examination, as I mentioned to you right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm going through an examination and talking to the individual people who work for me, not only to discover if there's any other information that we need to find, but also to ask them, how did this happen? How did this, occur to us? I think, listen, as I said before, I've had a tight-knit group of people who I trust implicitly. I had no reason to believe they weren't telling me the truth. It is heartbreaking to me that I wasn't told the truth. I'm a very loyal guy, and I expect loyalty in return. And lying to me is not an exhibition of loyalty. And so, I'm going to look into this personally. This is my responsibility, David. And so what steps we'll take after that? If there are concrete steps beyond what I've done today, then we'll certainly announce them and talk about them. If not, then, I'll just say, listen, I think we've gotten to the bottom of this, and we're going to move forward with the new team. And, I have a new team coming in as well, who I'm trying to integrate now also in the next 2 weeks. So there'll be a lot of action going on around here. Kelly?
Your critics say this reveals that you are a political bully, that your style is payback. Are you, and does this compromise your ability to serve?
No, I'm not. Listen, Kelly, politics ain't beanbag. Okay, and everybody in the country who engages in politics knows that. On the other hand, that's very, very different than saying that, someone's a bully. I have very heated discussions and arguments with people in my own party and on the other side of the aisle. I feel passionately about issues, and I don't hide my emotions from people. I am not a focus group tested, blow-dried candidate or governor. Now, that has always made some people, as you know, uneasy. Some people like that style, some people don't. And I've always said, I think you asked me a question after the election, are you willing to change your style in order to appeal to a broader audience? And I think I said no, because I am who I am, but I am not a bully. And what I will tell you is that the folks who have worked with me over a long period of time would, I believe, tell you that I'm tough, but I've shown over the last 4 years in the tone that we've set here that I'm willing to compromise, that I'm willing to work with others. And the campaign showed, with all of the folks who came from the other side of the aisle to support us, that if we weren't willing to have relationships with those folks, it would have never happened that way. So I don't believe that, Kelly, and I don't believe the body of work in the last 4 years displays that. Now, in this instance, the language used and the conduct displayed in those emails is unacceptable to me, and I will not tolerate it. But the best I can do is when I see stuff like that, to end it. And I know that won't satisfy everybody, but I'm not in the business of satisfying everybody. I'm in the business of trying to satisfy the people who elected me governor. Michael? Michael? Michael?
Governor, you say that you're going to individually interview all the members of the governor's office.
Senior staff, yeah.
What about the campaign? Are you going to personally interview?
Well, many...
How confident are you that it doesn't rise above Bill Stepien in the campaign?
There was no one above Bill Stepien in the campaign. He was the campaign manager. So there was no one above Bill Stepien in the campaign.
But there were plenty of other officials, some of them are quite close to you.
Yeah, but, Michael, their role in the campaign was not the day-to-day operation of the campaign. Bill Palatucci was the chairman of the campaign, and he was essentially involved with fundraising. That was Bill's main task. Mike Duhane was the general consultant. He dealt with TV ads and mail pieces. So the day-to-day operation of the campaign...
You're sure that they didn't know about?
Yes, I've spoken to both of them. They were two of my discussions yesterday. Yes. Angie, guys, we don't work that way.
How confident are you that this tactic, this bullying tactic, this revenge retribution tactic, did not go off beyond this, or are you?
Well, listen, Angie, I'm not going to... I'm smart enough now, after this experience, not to go out there and certify that unequivocally. Okay? I don't have any evidence before me as we speak that it went beyond this incident. But I can't tell you that I know that for sure as to every aspect of everything, because now I have to be much more circumspect about that. Prior to yesterday, I believed that if I looked someone in the eye who I worked with and trusted and asked them, that I would get an honest answer. Maybe that was naive, but that's what I believed. So now I'm going and digging in and asking more questions. But I can't make a warranty on that, Angie. I don't believe so, but I can't make a warranty on that, and I won't, because when I did that 4 weeks ago, I wound up being wrong. Do you follow up?
But you can tell us that you did not authorize retribution.
Absolutely not. No. And I knew nothing about this and until it started to be reported in the papers about the closure. But even then, I was told this was a traffic study. Senator Brony testified there was a traffic study. There still may have been a traffic study that now has political overtones to it as well. I don't know the answer to that, Angie. I think we're going to find out, but I don't know. Because Senator Brony presented all types of information that day to the legislature, statistics and maps and otherwise, that seemed to evidence a traffic study. So why would I believe that anybody would not be telling the truth about that? I said that, I think, at the time. But I'm not finished yet, guys. But the fact is that regardless of all that, you know, it's clear now that in the minds of some people, there were political overtones or political side deals on this. And that's unacceptable. So whether there was a traffic study or not, I don't know. It appeared that there was one based on what I saw in the testimony. But regardless of whether there was or there wasn't, there clearly were also political overtones that were evidenced in those emails and other messages that were never ever brought to my attention until yesterday. Yeah.
Can you understand why people would have a hard time believing that you didn't know about these lane closures, considering your management style and the closeness of your staff? And if you didn't know about it, what does that say about your ability to lead?
Well, listen, I am. There's this you know, kind of reputation out there of me being a micromanager. I'm not. I mean, I think if you talk to my staff, what they would tell you is that I delegate enormous authority to my staff and enormous authority to my cabinet. And I tell them, come to me with the policy decisions that need to be made, with some high-level personnel decisions that need to be made, but I do not manage in that kind of micro way, first. Second, there's no way that anybody would think that I know about everything that's going on, not only in every agency of government at all times, but also every independent authority. that New Jersey either has on its own or by state, both with New York, with Pennsylvania, and with Delaware. So what I could tell you is if people find that hard to believe, I don't know what else to say except to tell them that I had no knowledge of this, of the planning, the execution, or anything about it. And then I first found out about it after it was over. And even then, what I was told was that it was a traffic study. And there was no evidence to the contrary until yesterday that was brought to my attention or anybody else's attention. And so I understand why people would ask that question, and I understand your question completely. But what I also want to tell the people is that even with all that being said, it's still my responsibility. I didn't know about it, but it's my responsibility because I'm the governor. So I'm taking that responsibility and taking actions appropriate with executing the responsibility in accord with what the information is today. Marcia?
The U.S. Attorney in New Jersey has said it's opening an investigation to determine whether a federal law was violated. If you were the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey at one time, if you were the U.S. Attorney, would you think that there's anything to be investigated and would you bring any charges?
As I've said many times, when I was U.S. Attorney, I hated when politicians stood behind a podium and said, this is what the U.S. Attorney should or shouldn't do, and I'm not going to engage in that kind of conduct at all.
Are there any other cases, are you asking your staff, if there are any other cases of political retribution that were conducted during your campaign for other mayors?
Well, listen, again, let me say this. Clearly, that's the tone of those emails. But the other part of this that just shocks me is, as I've said to you all many times before, Mayor Sokolich was never on my radar screen. He was never mentioned to me as somebody whose endorsement we were even pursuing. And in fact, I think he said on CNN last night that he doesn't recall ever being asked for his endorsement. So part of this is, I never saw this as political retribution because I didn't think he did anything to us. Now, we pursued lots of endorsements during the campaign from Democrats, and we didn't receive most of them. We received about 60 at the end of the day. We pursued hundreds. And so I don't have any recollection of at any time anybody in the campaign ever asking me to meet with Mayor Sokolich or call him, which was the typical course that was used when we were attempting to get an endorsement, that staff would work with the elected official first, and then when they thought, using the vernacular, the ball was on the tee, they would call me in to make a phone call or have a meeting or a breakfast, and I would then meet with the elected official and see if I could bring it over the line. I don't remember ever meeting Mayor Sokolich in that, certainly I never did in that context. I'm sure I met him at some point at an event in Bergen County, but I have to tell you, until I saw his picture last night on television, I wouldn't have been able to pick him out of a lineup. And so part of this is, the reason that the retribution idea never came into my head is because I never even knew that we were pursuing his endorsement. And no one ever came to me to get me to try to pursue the endorsement.
The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report 113-322 by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part A of House Report number 113-322, offered by Mr. Tonko of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The underlying bill would expand states' responsibility in cleaning up Superfund hazardous waste sites. 5-minute vote on Kirsten Sinema's amendment, which would strike language in the bill allowing states to add a site to the national priorities list once every 5 years. And during this 5-minute vote, we'll take you back to today's news conference with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
Did I do wrong to have these folks think it was okay to lie to me? And there's a lot of soul searching that goes around with this. You know, when you're a leader of an organization, and I've had this happen to me before, where I've had folks not tell me the truth about something, not since I've been governor, but in previous leadership positions. You always wonder about what you could do differently, and believe me, John, I haven't had a lot of sleep the last 2 nights, and I've been doing a lot of soul searching. I'm sick over this. I have worked for the last 12 years in public life, developing a reputation for honesty and directness and blunt talk, one that I think is well-deserved. But, you know, when something like this happens, it's appropriate for you to question yourself, and certainly I am. And I am soul-searching on this. But what I also want the people of New Jersey to know is that this is the exception, not the rule. And they've seen that over the last 4 years with the way I've worked and what I've done. So I don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, this one incident happened, therefore the one incident defines the whole. It does not. Just like one employee who's lied doesn't determine the character of all the other employees around you. And so I don't want to overreact to that in that way either, John. But if you're asking me over the last 48 hours or last 36 hours, I've done some soul searching, you bet I have. Brian? Brian?
The mayor of Jersey City is quoted as saying that the day he declined to endorse you and said he would vote Democrat, as many as 10 appointments between state officials and Jersey City officials were canceled suddenly, all at once. How do you explain that in the context of what you now know about what some of your staff did?
Well, listen, all I know is, I don't know, Brian, that's the first answer I'll give you to the question. But what I'll also say is, listen, Mayor Fulop seems to be having a lot of disagreements with lots of people, with me, with the Senate President, and others. There's going to be back and forth. There's going to be meetings canceled. There's going to be public disagreements. But the fact of the matter is, we've continued to work with Jersey City over the course of time since he's been mayor. Now, in the last year, I think we've approved about $190 million in EDA financing for projects in Jersey City. The DEP Deputy Commissioner was just meeting yesterday with Mayor Fulop and his staff on Blue Acres issues to try to buy out properties that were affected by Sandy. So we continue to work with him. I don't know about specific meetings or what's going on, but certainly, you know, I will look into all of those things. But the fact is that what Mayor Fulop knows is when we agree with him from a policy perspective, we'll work with him. When we disagree with him, we'll express those disagreements. And sometimes that'll mean friction. He's suing the Port Authority at the moment. Okay, so there's lots of back and forth and to and fro that happens in these things. I look into all this stuff, but in the end, have I at times been angry with Mayor Fulop and disagreed with him? You bet I have. But I also spoke at his swearing in, at his invitation. So political relationships in this state go up and down, as you know, Brian. Sometimes strange bedfellows, sometimes expected ones. And they move. So I'm sure there's been movement in those relationships over time, but not anything that I can explain as to the specific question. Bob?
Yeah, I've heard that you actually, one of your staff read the Bergen record and learned something new in terms of situational awareness. Does the universal apology to the state of New Jersey include the press corps?
Well, sure. I mean, listen, most of you, I hope, are citizens of New Jersey. So you would
There's some exceptions.
I know there are. I know that we don't need to point them out. But yes, of course it does. And because the fact is I came out here and said something that was untrue. I mean, unwittingly, but I said something that was untrue. I think what you all have seen about me over the last 4 years of my dealings with you is that I deal with you directly. And I say exactly what I think. And I think over time I have developed the reputation for telling you all the truth, as I see it. There can be disagreements, but the truth is I see it. And so, yeah, I mean, would I include the press corps? Of course I would, because most, if not, many, if not most of you.
The nays are 227. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of the substitute. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker,
The Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2279. And pursuant to House Resolution 455, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration Bill H.R. 2279 and pursuant to House Resolution 455 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The member of opinion chair, the ayes have it. The question is on engrossment, third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the Solid Waste Disposal Act relating to review of regulations under such act and to amend the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980 relating to financial responsibility for classes of facilities.
The House will come to order. The House will come to order. Will all members take conversations off the floor, and members please clear the well. The House will come to order. Please take all conversations from the floor of the House, and please, members, clear the well. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Peters of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2279 to the Committee on Energy and Commerce with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendments. At the end of the bill, add the following new title, Title 4, Preserving the Polluter Pays.
No objection. Without objection. It's order. The House will come to order. Please take all conversations off the floor, and please, members, to cease conversation before. The House will come to order. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the final amendment to the bill, which will not kill the bill or send it back to committee. And if adopted, the bill will proceed immediately to final passage as amended. My amendment simply states that the bill won't take effect if it results in fewer cleaned-up sites, if it shifts responsibilities from polluters to American taxpayers, and if there's...
Gentleman is correct. The House will come to order. House will come to order. The gentleman will continue.
Thank you. And if there's greater exposure to carcinogens for schools, hospitals, and nursing homes within 5 miles of a contaminated site. Mr. Speaker, for too long we've heard as an article of faith that we have to choose between a prosperous economy and a clean environment, the idea that we can't have both. But that is a false choice. People in San Diego and people around the country know that we deserve nothing less than both. We need to provide both economic opportunity and clean air and water for our future generations. In my first career, for 15 years, I practiced environmental law in the public and private sectors. Many of my clients were businesses or local governments that struggled to understand and follow what they felt were overly complex and time-consuming regulatory requirements. And from this experience, I have no doubt that overly burdensome red tape hurts our economy. So I hope that in any case where we can streamline and simplify environmental regulations while still protecting and enhancing the health of our rivers, lakes, oceans, and air, everyone in this Congress would be on board. And I hope that we all agree that real, substantive protections are important to ensuring that our drinking water, ocean water, and the land we live and farm on are safe for our children, the elderly, and our families. These resources are economic assets that we have inherited, that we have a responsibility to preserve, and that we must be active stewards in protecting. At the heart of the Superfund program is a common-sense idea that those who cause pollution would pay to clean it up. The underlying bill turns away from this basic principle and instead puts hard-working taxpayers who didn't cause the pollution on the hook for the expensive cleanups. That's not right, and it's not a good incentive for preventing future contamination. The bill creates an unfunded mandate by allowing states to move polluted sites off of their regulatory plates to the federal Superfund list, shifting responsibility from corporations and states to the federal taxpayer. And just as the Congress has slashed the Superfund budget 40% over the last 5 years, if we add more sites to the already...
Gentleman is correct. House is not in order. Please take all conversations off the floor of the House.